Jake stepped outside that morning, inhaling the crisp air, coffee in hand, ready to take on the day, until his foot landed in something soft, squishy, and unmistakably foul. He froze mid-step, his brain processing the horror before his nose confirmed it. Dog poop. Not just any dog poop. Fresh, warm, and right in the middle of his perfectly manicured lawn. His stomach twisted with disgust as he shook his foot violently, but the damage was done. His once pristine sneaker was now an unfortunate casualty in what was about to become the pettiest war this neighborhood had ever seen. It wasn't the first time. Over the past week, he had noticed the random, smelly landmines popping up in different spots on his lawn. At first, he chalked it up to bad luck, a wandering stray, or maybe a careless owner passing by. But the sheer consistency was too deliberate, too perfectly placed. This wasn't an accident. Someone was targeting him. Jake clenched his jaw and scanned the street. The neighborhood was quiet, houses lined up in a picture-perfect suburban row, driveways empty as people rushed off to work. No witnesses, no clues, just another pile of evidence on his lawn. He needed proof, and he had a strong suspicion about who was behind it. The next morning, he set up his doorbell camera, aiming it strategically toward the front yard, ensuring it captured every inch of potential crime scene territory. Then, he waited. Another day passed. Then another. And then, like clockwork, the next pile appeared. Heart pounding with anticipation, Jake rushed inside, opened the camera footage, and there she was. Karen. Not just any Karen. The Karen. The neighbor from 2 doors down, the one with the blindingly blonde highlights, the oversized sunglasses that made her look like an overgrown mosquito, and the perpetual scowl of someone who thought the world owed her something. And her dog, some small, fluffy, yappy thing, was the culprit. But the worst part? The part that made Jake's blood boil? She watched. She stood there, let her dog do its business, glanced around as if checking for an audience, and then walked away like nothing had happened. Jake stared at the footage in disbelief. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just laziness, it was deliberate. He could feel his hands tighten into fists as he replayed the video, watching her smug little stroll back to her house. He wasn't the kind of person to let things slide. This wasn't just about poop anymore. This was about principle. That afternoon, he marched straight over to her house. He didn't bother knocking politely. Instead, he gave 3 sharp raps on her door, enough to let her know he meant business. She answered within seconds, peering at him through her ridiculous oversized sunglasses, her lips pursed in an expression that immediately irritated him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Jake took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. "Yeah, actually, you can. Your dog has been using my lawn as a bathroom for the past week. I caught it on camera. You need to start cleaning up after it." Karen tilted her head, her expression shifting into something between amusement and mild annoyance. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It's just a little dog. A little mess. Nature, you know. Relax." Jake's eye twitched. Relax? Did she just tell him to relax about stepping in her dog's poop every morning? No, it's not just a little mess. It's disgusting, it's rude, and it's happening every single day. I have the footage. Do you want to see it? Karen crossed her arms, sighing dramatically. "Oh, come on, Jake. It's grass. What's the big deal? It'll decompose. Think of it as free fertilizer." His patience was hanging by a thread. "I don't need free fertilizer. I need you to be a responsible pet owner." Karen gave an exaggerated shrug. "Well, I can't control where my dog goes. Besides, it's not like I'm doing it on purpose." Jake clenched his teeth, staring at her. She was absolutely doing it on purpose. She just didn't think there would be consequences. He exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to remain calm. "Fine. If it happens again, I'll make sure it gets taken care of." Karen smirked. "Whatever makes you feel better." And with that, she shut the door in his face. The next morning, the poop was back. But this time, it wasn't just randomly placed. It was positioned right on the edge of his driveway, as if she had purposefully let her dog squat as close as possible to his property line just to make a point. Jake stared at it, his eye twitching. She wanted a reaction. She was taunting him. Fine. She wanted a war? She was about to get one. He walked back inside, grabbed a plastic bag, and carefully scooped up every last offensive piece of evidence. He didn't just collect today's poop. No, he went back, revisiting the previous spots, making sure he had a full week's worth of Karen's disrespect bagged and ready. And then, with a smirk creeping onto his face, he got an idea. A brilliant idea. He grabbed a second bag, and then a third. He was going to return what was rightfully hers. That evening, under the cover of darkness, he tiptoed toward Karen's front yard, carrying his carefully curated collection of doggy deposits. He took his time, ensuring every last piece was placed strategically. Right on her front porch. A little near the doormat. A little around the pathway leading to her driveway. A perfectly crafted landmine obstacle course. As a final touch, he took his last handful and carefully wrote out a little message on the pavement. Clean up after your dog. Then, grinning ear to ear, he returned home and waited. Morning came. Jake brewed his coffee, stepped outside, and leaned against his car, pretending to check his phone as he waited for the show to begin. Then it happened. Karen stepped outside, still in her robe, a fancy-looking coffee mug in hand. She took 2 steps and then squelched. Her scream echoed through the entire neighborhood. Oh my God! What the? She looked down, horrified, realizing she was completely surrounded by the thing she had been so casually leaving on Jake's lawn. She lifted her foot, shaking it violently, hopping on one leg as if that would somehow erase the damage. Jake took a sip of his coffee, watching with immense satisfaction. She turned her head sharply, her eyes locking onto him. She knew. Jake raised his cup in a mock toast. Good morning, Karen. She was already marching toward him, fury in her eyes. Did you do this? Jake smiled. What makes you think it was me? It's just nature. You know, free fertilizer. Her face turned an unnatural shade of red. You think this is funny? He shrugged. I think it's ironic. Karen fumed, glancing down at her soiled porch, her ruined slippers, the absolute mess she now had to deal with. She gritted her teeth, pointing a manicured finger at him. You're going to regret this. Jake just grinned. We'll see. As she stormed back into her house, Jake leaned back against his car. The war had officially begun, and he was just getting started. Jake had never felt this level of satisfaction before. Watching Karen hop around in her own personal minefield of dog poop had been the highlight of his week. But he knew better than to think she'd take the loss gracefully. No, Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was the type to escalate. And sure enough, she did. The next morning, Jake woke up to the sound of a door slamming so hard it nearly rattled his windows. He peeked through the blinds just in time to see Karen storming across her yard in his direction, her phone in one hand, a pair of ruined slippers in the other. She reached his driveway and banged on his door with the fury of a woman who had never been told no in her life. He took his time answering, letting her stew for a moment before swinging the door open with his best innocent expression. Morning, Karen, he said, sipping his coffee as if he hadn't been expecting her. She held up her phone. I have you on camera, you idiot. You think you're funny. Jake raised an eyebrow. You have me on camera? What a coincidence. I have you on camera too. You know, letting your dog crap all over my yard for the past week. Karen's face twitched, but she recovered quickly, tossing the ruined slippers onto his porch. You're a menace. You're harassing me. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Oh please. Harassment? All I did was return what was yours. You want to call the cops? Go ahead. I'd love to see you explain why you think I committed a crime by relocating your dog's poop from my property to yours. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She wasn't used to people pushing back. He could tell she was scrambling for a response, but in the end all she could do was huff, flip her over-processed hair, and storm back toward her house. Jake smiled as he watched her go, but his gut told him this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to just let this slide. And he was right. That afternoon, as he was mowing his lawn, a white SUV pulled up in front of his house. The HOA president, a stiff-looking man named Richard, stepped out, adjusting his polo shirt like he was about to conduct some kind of serious legal proceeding. Jake groaned, shutting off the mower and walking over to meet him before he could even knock. "Afternoon, Richard. What brings you here?" Richard cleared his throat, glancing down at his clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "Jake, we received a complaint from one of your neighbors about an, incident involving waste being placed on private property." Jake smirked. "Let me guess. Karen?" Richard sighed. "Look, I don't want to get involved in disputes between neighbors, but this situation is escalating. She's claiming you vandalized her property." Jake folded his arms. "Vandalized? No, Richard, I simply returned the mess her dog left on my lawn. And I have the footage to prove it. Want to see?" Richard hesitated. He had known Karen long enough to realize she was a habitual complainer, but he also had a duty to keep the peace. "Jake, the HOA just wants to avoid unnecessary drama. Maybe you both could agree to keep your yards clean and move on." Jake scoffed. "I was keeping my yard clean. She was the one using it as a public restroom. So if she stops, I stop. Simple." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Fine. I'll talk to her." But the talk didn't work. That night, Jake checked his cameras again and found Karen standing at the edge of her driveway, staring at his house like some kind of cartoon villain. Her dog, of course, was squatting right in front of his mailbox, and she didn't even try to hide it this time. She just stood there, arms crossed, smirking like she had just won a battle. Jake cracked his knuckles. If she wanted to play dirty, he could play dirtier. The next morning, he recruited his best friend, Mike, to help him execute the next phase of his revenge. Mike was the kind of guy who thrived on chaos. The moment Jake told him the story, his eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas. "Dude, you have to escalate," Mike said, grinning as they sat in Jake's garage, strategizing like they were planning a heist. "I don't want to do anything illegal," Jake said. "I just want to make her regret ever messing with me." Mike nodded, thinking, what if we make the problem bigger than just you? What if we turn the whole neighborhood against her? That got Jake's attention. "Go on." Mike leaned in. "Karen's been a nightmare to more than just you, right? What if we gather some allies?" Jake grinned. That was a fantastic idea. Over the next few days, he started talking to the other neighbors. It turned out Karen had been annoying people for years. She had reported kids for riding their bikes too fast, complained about people parking too close to her curb, and even tried to get someone fined for having an unsightly mailbox. Nobody liked her. And when Jake told them about the poop war, they were more than willing to help. The plan was simple. Every time Karen's dog left a gift on someone's lawn, they would collect it. And instead of just returning it to her property, they would take it to a single designated spot. Her driveway. The execution was flawless. Over the course of a week, more and more poop began to mysteriously accumulate right in front of her house. At first, she thought it was Jake, and she yelled at him from across the street. But soon, she realized it wasn't just him. She saw other neighbors smirking when they passed by. She saw kids giggling when they rode their bikes near her house. The entire neighborhood was in on it. By the end of the week, Karen was fuming. She stood in her yard, hands on her hips, looking around wildly like she was trying to catch someone in the act. But nobody was going to confess. That night, she did the only thing she could do. She grabbed a shovel and started cleaning it up herself. Jake watched from his window, sipping a beer with the biggest grin on his face. Mike texted him. "Mission accomplished?" Jake replied. Oh, it's just getting started. Karen had spent the entire evening furiously shoveling piles of dog poop off her driveway, cursing under her breath as she tossed each scoop into a garbage bag. Every now and then, she would glance around, trying to catch someone watching, but nobody dared to step forward. The neighborhood had turned against her, and she knew it. Jake sat comfortably on his porch, pretending to scroll through his phone while secretly watching the show. It was the most satisfying thing he'd seen in a long time. Every time Karen gagged, every time she stomped her foot in frustration, every time she muttered something about filthy peasants, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of victory. But he also knew Karen well enough to realize that she wasn't going to let this end without one final attempt to get back at him. The next morning, he was proven right. Jake was halfway through making breakfast when his phone buzzed with a notification from his security cameras. He pulled up the footage and immediately felt a rush of disbelief. Karen's husband, who had been mostly absent from this entire war, was outside. And he was walking the dog. Normally, this wouldn't have been alarming, except for the fact that he was standing right in front of Jake's lawn, pretending to check his phone while the dog squatted once again. Jake couldn't believe it. The woman had actually recruited her husband into this nonsense. He watched as the man made a weak attempt at looking innocent, then casually strolled away as if nothing had happened. Jake grinned. Oh, so that's how they wanted to play it. Later that afternoon, Jake decided it was time for the final move. He had already gotten the neighborhood on his side, but this last play would cement his victory permanently. He pulled up the footage of Karen's husband and sent it directly to the HOA group chat with a simple caption. "Guess it runs in the family." Within minutes, his phone exploded with messages. One neighbor replied, "Oh, so now it's a team effort?" Another neighbor chimed in, "She had the nerve to call the HOA on you when she's doing this? Unbelievable." Richard, the HOA president, sent the best response of all, "I'll handle it." Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling like a general who had just won a battle without even lifting a finger. By the next day, Karen's smug attitude had completely vanished. She didn't come outside to cause trouble. She didn't let her dog wander onto Jake's lawn. Instead, she was furious, but not at him. She was fighting with her own husband in the driveway. Jake happened to be watering his plants when he overheard bits and pieces of the argument. "You got caught, you idiot," Karen hissed. "You told me to do it," her husband shot back. "Not in front of his cameras." Jake chuckled and turned up the hose pressure, pretending not to listen. An hour later, a letter from the HOA was taped to Karen's door. She ripped it off, scanned it quickly, then crumpled it up with a dramatic groan before storming inside. That same evening, Jake received a text from Richard. "She's been fined $500 for repeated violations and a formal complaint has been placed on her HOA record. She's on probation now. If she does it again, it could escalate to legal action." Jake smirked as he read the message. That was exactly the kind of justice he had been hoping for. He knew Karen had probably thrown a tantrum inside her house, but there was nothing she could do. She had played the game and lost, badly. The following week, something incredible happened. Jake walked outside one morning and noticed something unusual. His lawn was spotless. Not a single pile of dog poop anywhere. No new messes, no unpleasant surprises. He checked his camera footage just to be sure, and sure enough, the video showed Karen picking up after her dog for the very first time. He almost couldn't believe it. The war was officially over. The best part? The neighbors had never been closer. Mike came over that weekend for a barbecue, and nearly half the neighborhood showed up. It was as if Karen's downfall had brought everyone together. People swapped stories about all the nonsense she had pulled over the years. They laughed, grilled burgers, and for the first time in a long time, everyone actually enjoyed their community. Karen, on the other hand, stayed locked inside her house. Mike leaned over to Jake, whispering, "Think she's plotting her next move?" Jake shook his head, grinning. "Nah. She knows she lost. She's not dumb enough to try again." But deep down, Jake knew that Karen was still Karen. And just to be safe, he kept his security cameras running.